Hey guys, welcome to Scar Stories. Today is week 1 of a brand new series we're starting called Addicted. When you think about addiction, most of us think about substances, but addiction can also include behaviors and habits that get out of balance. Today I interview licensed professional therapist Keith Herriman. Check out our conversation as we talk about a growing problem he's seeing more and more of in his practice: people who are addicted to technology. This can include everything from video games to social media to even our phone use. Keith has some great info and suggestions for all of us so we can all be a bit more balanced when it comes to our use of technology. Check this out. All right. Hey, you guys. Welcome to Scar Stories. I'm so excited to start this new series on addiction, and I have the most amazing guest for our first week together. His name is Keith Herriman. And Keith, I'm going to ask you just to introduce yourself right now and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do to our listeners, I should say, before we get on with our interview. So
you do things to your listeners. Yeah, I'm Keith Herriman. I'm a limited licensed psychologist here in Michigan. I counsel people, basically. I'm a therapist. Counsel all different types of people, but a lot of, adolescent, younger boys, young adult males, as well as couples and, adults and everything. But I like to specialize in, kind of teenage boys, since I was one obviously at some point. So I know what it's like.
And I think you make a great point. I think that's really important because I've gotten some counseling off and on over the years for some different things, just to try to work through and process different things that I've experienced. And I know it was sort of helpful to me to actually meet with a woman, no offense, because it was like you felt like, depending on what the issue is, you feel like maybe they understand a little more or something. So do you find that that's probably what you're saying too? It's like you kind of relate, to boys a little bit more, you know what I mean? Because they're,
Because I'm still really immature, I think. But no. Right. But the generation gap, as far as this is one of the first generations where kids play video games with their parents, which before that was like, no, that never happened.
Right.
I don't know what that says about adults these days, but
I know, it's true.
Yeah, playing video games. I like, watching a lot of different shows that a lot of the kids are watching. It helps that they watch more mature stuff. So, kind of closes the gap there.
Well, it's so important, I think, especially when we're trying to work through an issue, it's so important that we connect with people on some level that we can relate to them. It's really, I find that true for my own life too. So I totally get that. And I think that's awesome. So what drove you to be, I'm just curious, what drove you to be a counselor? Why this? Why did you?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't like school. People that know me won't be shocked by hearing that. But first semester of undergrad in college, I took a intro to psych class, and I was like, I could actually apply this immediately to my life.
Right.
Really helpful. And for each class, I'd just be thinking about how it applies to my own life. That I'm like, this is useful. This is the first useful thing I've learned at school. This is insanely interesting in a way. That's awesome. I want to do that. And yeah, awesome. I don't know. I like talking to people. I think I'm a good problem solver. I like meeting new people and hearing their stories and getting in their shoes, and then, helping them figure out what might be a good way to go about their life.
Right. I hear it. That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. And as you know, I started this new series about addiction. And, addiction is one of those topics where, and I know you've probably dealt with this in so many different facets in your practice, it really affects everybody in some sort of way. And the other thing about it is that there's so many types of addictions. And I think when I think about what that topic really encompasses, there's so many things that we all think of mentally when we think about what is addiction. It could be a substance, it could be a relationship pattern, it could be, something outside of ourselves. It could be, a behavior, and it just seems to encompass a lot of things that I'm sure that we all have like something that we struggle with, that we're kind of have a healthy out of balance relationship with something in our life, and I think when we first talked, I think that was what was kind of an interesting idea is we're going to try to cover a lot of different things in the series. But one of the things that I know you and I touched on was kind of a new addiction that you maybe wouldn't consider, but also makes a ton of sense given the world that we live in now. And that is the addiction to like technology or I don't know if that's even the right way to express that, or addicted to our phones, addicted to video games, addicted to tech stuff, like where we just kind of maybe have an out of balance in that area. And I know many of my listeners today that are joining us, I know a lot of you guys play video games, and this is so not like a down on video games conversation, because I know so many
video games are evil.
Exactly. No, but I know you don't feel that way because you play video games, right, Keith? So, so this is not about that, but it does pose an interesting question though, is, can it become addictive, and when does it become a problem? And I think, that's kind of an interesting topic. And I thought maybe you could even talk to us a little bit about that. Like, let's start with just maybe defining it. Like, what is an unhealthy addiction to technology?
I mean, with like maybe if we take addiction out of the, phrasing, I think that screws people up a lot, because I think it just, rock stars doing cocaine and drinking, and stuff like that. But I mean, really, addiction is just an unhealthy behavior. And so any behavior that becomes unhealthy, which means, it's, causing, disturbances for you, you're unable to, work, do well in school. I mean, pass your classes, you don't got to get perfect A's. But socially, if you're kind of stop hanging out with your friends, and you're just, doing this addictive behavior all the time. And these addictive behaviors help you escape reality, which,
Sure.
To some extent, it's okay to do that. If your reality is horrible in the moment, like, yeah, temporarily you do need to escape it if you can't escape it physically. But, over time, you can't just keep doing it because it's not healthy, and you need to come back to reality. So, pretty much any behavior that is, becomes a problem can be determined as unhealthy or an addiction if you can't, stop it. So especially with technology, relying on your phone all the time to where you can't be with somebody in person, especially because being with people in person and talking with them face to face does certain things in your brain that can't be replicated even by a Zoom call. And humans need that. I mean, they've needed it forever. And well, heck, this past year, I think everybody's experienced what it's like not to have that. And it's a really depressing, horrible thing, which is why addictions have skyrocketed, and depression and suicide and a lot of horrible things. So, I mean, it's important to be with people.
Sure. No, and I noticed that even with myself. I mean, my fiance and I talk about that because he's got, he gets text a lot because of his schedule. And it's like, it's always one of those things, like, I know he wants to give me his full attention, but then there's these moments where it's like, ding, ding. And you feel like it's always pulling them away. And like, you're trying to have this conversation. Exactly.
What are you saying?
Interfering. Exactly. It's totally like that. And I think we can all sort of relate to like, just maybe becoming a little more aware of like really being present when we are with somebody and really giving them our full engagement, and just putting the phone down or silencing it for at least chunks of time, and not having to be available to everybody 24 hours a day via the phone. So, and that brings up an interesting point too. I mean, in your practice, do you see different types of tech addiction? Like, cause I mean, we kind of touched on a couple things, like maybe video games versus phone versus maybe social media. There could be that type of addiction where you can't stop scrolling. You can't stop, engaging with it.
Yeah. So social media is probably the worst one. I mean, it's just causes so many problems. I mean, the biggest one is definitely, affairs and infidelity. It's like, so many people are like, oh, this person from high school just popped up. Like, I may know them. And it's like, I just, said hi. And then it's like, next thing you know, they're, having fun with each other without their spouses. And it's just like, oh my gosh, people, what are you doing? Or even if you're married to somebody whose family is really unhealthy, and they're, using social media to indirectly attack you or post things that are clearly meant for specific person. I'm just like, why are you exposing yourself to that? Like, block them. Don't expose yourself to it, because it's so hard not to react when you feel attacked. And so you just got to limit, the ability to be attacked, which, taking time off of social media, but also blocking people that, you don't need to know what other people are doing all the time, but the few people that you do care about and are close with, that's fine. It's like, being able to see someone's photo album remotely, which is a cool thing.
Sure, sure. Well, it's kind of like anything in life. I mean, we can abuse anything, and leave it to human beings. We always find our way, right? To like take something that maybe could be good and then we mess it up, because it's too much. It's like overindulgence, it's like, ice cream. It's great, but you can't just, eat it 3 times a day and think that you're going to feel great. It's like anything. So there's a place for it.
Yeah. I mean, it creates a lot of discontentment too. Cause people post usually the best things for the most part in their life and the best pictures that they take 1,000 pictures on vacation and they choose the 5 that look like their life's perfect in paradise. Of course, everybody that sees that, even I, if I saw that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? I'm here in Michigan. It's miserable outside right now. Why am I not touring the world like they are? But I mean, in reality, there's a lot more dynamics to it. It's not clear cut. No one's life is perfect. I mean, there are better lives, but
sure. Well,
we doesn't really help you if it just
right. We give each other the highlight reel, is what I call it.
Yeah,
it's like we give the very best little pieces, and we don't see the other side of them. I always talk about that because I think I shared with you when we first talked, that I was an artist, and that's something that really can happen a lot as an artist because you want so much to put like your best photo and your best whatever out there for people. And I do tour a lot and things like that. And at the same time, there's this reality of just normal day-to-day life. And especially during the pandemic, my life is very non-glamorous right now. It's about cleaning my house and practicing and, paying bills and doing laundry. And it's not glamorous stuff. It's just life. But you know what I mean? We forget that. And then the thing is, those are the very things that I think tie us together as humans, those things that make us, they're not so glamorous, Wait,
you're human? You're a musician and a human still?
Exactly.
What?
Oh, crazy, right?
Are you saying celebrities are humans too?
That's fun. Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah,
for our list, I think our listeners will be interested in this. What, in your opinion, Keith, what is the difference between having like a healthy, because we all sometimes overindulge with some of these things. How do we know if we're going too far? How do we know if it's like we're doing social media too much or we're spending too much time on video games? Are there any kind of little clues or kind of boundaries that we can give ourselves to sort of keep us in a healthy spot with this stuff?
Yeah, when your eyes start bleeding, it's time to step away from the screen, I think. So that's on one end of the spectrum. But just things like, simply anybody who plays any type of game, when you start to get really agitated and frustrated, especially if you're not, doing well in the game one day, because you are doing video games, there's challenges, there's goals you're trying to achieve. And, when you're unable to achieve those goals, it creates frustration, which goes true with everything in life. And the difference is though, when you're not physically exerting yourself like you would be in a physical sports game, or physically going on an adventure and trying to slay beasts or whatever, your body still has all this energy and it's ready to go. It's just primed to physically exert itself. And which when somebody comes in is like, hey, dinner's ready, you snap at them, or it's like, hey, you've been on there for 12 hours. You might think about, getting off and spending some time with your wife. And it's just like, just leave me alone. I'm about to reach the level. Oh my gosh. And that's what happens.
Right.
Your body's like, I haven't exerted myself. I'm not tired, but the goal and challenges are very real. And those are good things to try and overcome, but it's important to physically, and a lot of people don't want to hear this, but being physically active, even just having a set of free weights in your room that you can just, while a loading screen's going or something, just, lift some weights, just something so that your body is kind of getting that energy out can really help you, maintain your emotional state in a lot healthier way.
Wow. I think that's really good advice. And I've never thought of it that way, what you're sharing. I wonder if any of our viewers have, because that's that's a really good point, because there's all this anxiety when you're playing and you're trying to, and I'm terrible at video games. So I, especially when I do play, I've been like, I suck at this. This is probably why I never play. But yeah, there could be a lot of anxiety building. And that's something like I have talked to my fans a little bit about, like being physically fit, because I'm a huge like runner. I'm actually this jock person. Aside from being an artist, I love sports and I really try to take care of myself. And I know just with the anxiety in my own career, being an artist, I would be so messed up if I did not like work out and like run and have a place to like just get that physical, energy out. So I think that's a really good advice. And that might be something to kind of keep things in balance when you guys are playing games out there. Like if you are feeling a lot of anxiety, to maybe do that, or maybe take breaks where you can just like go run around the block or do some free weights like you were suggesting.
Yeah.
A really good idea,
I mean, even just for anybody, gamers, just going for a walk. Like, I mean, they've done tons of research, and just anybody, adults, kids, anybody, each day, if you just spend 30 minutes kind of by yourself, turn off all the devices, not listening to anything, just kind of you and your mind. And, going for a walk is a great way to do that so it doesn't get too out of control. But walking, I mean, there's so many benefits. I mean, number one, you're stopping all that stimulation that is going into your body, you're able to process the day's events, and you're out in nature, which is very restorative and helps clear your mind and get you thinking about other things. Fresh air, oxygen's great, I hear, for your body. And some physical exercise too. And usually by the time you come back, you are in a better state to various degrees, but just simple walk. It's real simple. You don't have to go out and do a marathon because no one's going to really do that if they aren't already.
Right. I hear you. Well, that's really good advice. I think that's a really helpful thing because it kind of gives you like some boundaries and just to watch your own anxiety level. If you find yourself, the other thing you touched on is just if you're starting to snap at people and just becoming angry over stuff and like it wasn't anything they did, you're just kind of overreacting. I mean, that seems like a good gauge too, when you feel like you just can't be interrupted because what you're doing on social media is so important, or your video game or whatever you're doing, it's probably a good.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I'm learning to do, is just learning how to get healthy with disconnecting from my phone, like this need to constantly be available to everyone, like of being okay with putting it down and then just engaging. I mean, that's kind of something I'm working on myself because I feel like, wow, am I addicted to my phone? I mean, because it's like,
that's the hard thing. Like people that are in social media, that's how they make their money or are trying to make their money. Like I've listened to people that make lots of money doing it, but their entire day from the time they wake up to go to bed, it's all about thinking about content, creating content, interacting online. And I'm like, that seems so draining. I don't know how that is sustainable. And I mean, if you're able to figure it out to where you can balance it out, I think that's great. I mean, for the most part, it's like, if you're not making, if that's not your primary, gig, and you're not, let's be honest, if you think you're not really going to be making that your main career, just set some time aside where you just turn your phone on do not disturb and just, leave it in the other room even. Because if there's an emergency, people can call 911, they can go to the hospital, police can show up and help them. I mean, there's other people that will handle it. A lot of people think they're the sole reason another person retains their sanity, which to some degree is okay, but really that's not. You need to recognize that, they need professional services if it's that bad that you can't put your phone down for like 20 minutes.
Right. No, I hear you. That's a really good advice, and totally true. And I have another question for you, actually, as we're talking. It's giving me more things I want to ask you about. Can you give us an example too of like, if you do have an unhealthy relationship with technology, what are some of the really negative effects? I mean, we've kind of touched on it, but like even maybe there's even a story of someone that you dealt with in your practice. I know you can't, we're certainly not trying to, expose anyone or anything.
All the clients, no.
Exactly. But just giving us an example of like what happens when we don't keep this in check, like maybe how does it affect our lives in a negative way?
Well, I mean, over the past year with schools being shut down and being done remotely, like, usually every year at the end of each semester is when parents are like, hey, fix my kid. There's a month before the semester ends. Make sure he passes all his classes. And I'm like, what? You should have come earlier. But so I've seen a ton of that. And it's I mean, I can't even think about how many, but at least probably like around a dozen, teenage boys that it was always the same thing, especially in before Christmas break. A parent would call. It'd be like, I have a teenage boy playing too many video games, not getting his work done, and he's just sitting around the house, depressed, and we're fighting all the time. And I'm like, yep, you and everybody else seems like. So, I mean, that's been really horrible. And parents have been struggling, especially because gaming is, especially nowadays, is a great way for kids, especially I'd say more so males, to connect with their peers. In the same way they would just, pick up the phone and call somebody. A lot of guys don't just do that. But if you're playing a game and talking, that's totally cool and doable for some reason. And I can relate too, because it was the same way when I was, in high school. So, I mean, there's a lot of positive social aspects, especially when you aren't able to see your friends at school. And for a time there, you weren't able to, I mean, some of them still can't even spend time with their friends for one reason or another. So, I mean, it's hard to figure out that balance, but, I think figuring out the workload, especially, for parents and for kids and college students too, that are on their own, figure out a workload, figure out how much, spend some time each day working on homework. You can be, a half hour, maybe on one day, and, an hour, a couple hours, on certain days, depending on what there is. But again, make sure you're getting out, and whenever possible, socializing in person is ideal. But even if you can't be in person, yes, socializing through, video call or phone call or texting is it keeps going down the list as far as what you get from it. But if you are going to play video games, even if it's Minecraft, just play with some other people. It's still casual, still relaxing, but other people are there, and you can kind of feel comfortable to talk about it, stuff like that, which I think is great for people to do, especially during the past year.
Sure.
What was the question?
No, that was great. Well, no, I was wondering, and I agree with you, because my fiance has an older son that really likes video games, and he has two sons that really like video games actually. But I noticed that was something I have observed is during this pandemic, that being online and playing these games, it was a chance for him to socialize and kind of hang out with his friends, which I see a real positive benefit for. And I guess my question is sort of like, if we are using it in an unhealthy way, like let's say it just becomes obsessive, or it's too much time, or and that it kind of goes back to one of my questions I asked earlier about how do you know when you're crossing that line? Because you had mentioned that some parents were bringing their kids in after their kids that's all they're doing is playing video games, and they're depressed. And is playing too much lead to other negative things about maybe our own self-esteem or our self-worth, or just our balance and our own mental process? What's the danger of doing it too much? If, even if it is something social that has a positive role, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like more and more games are adding, I mean, it's been in games for a while, but even more so, games are adding things just taunts. I mean, taunts have been in games for a long time, but it just seems like more and more of the younger kids, it's not about winning. It's about you winning and then making sure other people know how much they suck, and by rubbing it in their face. And I'm like, you haven't said anything about, being glad that you accomplished, you were the number one person in the game. All I'm hearing is you trash talk everybody else and tell them how they're garbage and doing their little Fortnite taunts. But I mean, just think about anybody that's exposed to people rubbing it in their face, how they didn't do as good as them at anything. No one wants to be exposed to that. But if after each match or each game you're playing, you're being exposed to that, or even just looking at the scoreboard and seeing where you rank, unless you're number one constantly and you're the one doing it to everybody. I mean, that's going to make anybody super frustrated and angry and not feel great about themselves, because there's literally a ranking system for how good you are and your value. If that's the only thing you're doing in your life, that's the only place where you're investing all your time and energy, then yeah, I guess that is where your value is found, on the ranks. I mean, it's there's a lot of people playing these games, and very little of them are at the top. So unless you're at the very top, 100 in a game, you're probably just going to feel like you're not as good as everybody, which over time, not going to be great.
Right. No, that's a really good point too. I'm glad you said that, because I think that's maybe the problem with anything that we do a lot, is that we kind of wrap our whole self-esteem up in that activity. So if it doesn't go well, or if we're not the best, it can make us feel like that's our whole identity, is how we are doing in the video game. When, obviously I feel like, and I know you and I agree that we're both like, we're all human beings. We're created for this purpose, that God has something for each of us to do and to excel at and to contribute to the world. And not that there's anything wrong with video gaming, but it is something where we have probably a mission that goes beyond that. And especially if we're celebrating like a situation where we're just, dissing other people all the time, that can kind of become a really negative, kind of a negative way to spend your time in a way. If that's like the value system, that's just like putting other people down, which, shouldn't be like that, but I know it's typical when we're competing.
Well, I mean, it's so bad to like the point when I play mine, in multiplayer, and like I see like someone's doing really good, and I'm like, wow, they're doing really good. Like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna message them and tell them, wow, you're really good. And I'm like, they're probably just gonna think I'm being sarcastic and that it's negative. So I don't do it, because I'm like, I can't figure out a way to say this in a way that they won't perceive as being sarcastic. I'm like, that says a lot about our society.
Right. For sure. That's funny. I have a question for you. In your practice, do you think there's certain people that have a more tendency to have an addiction with technology? Like, do you think, for example, is it something that younger people are struggling with more than people who are, 30s and 40s, who are maybe a little farther along in life? Like, where do you see the bigger issue? Is there?
I mean, before you have to get a job to, pay for your home or, wherever you're living, eating. I mean, there's a lot of kids that are still, in high school and stuff. Excuse me, a lot of college students that are still, living with their parents, and that's fine. And even out of college, because a lot of times it's not clear what you're supposed to do after college, and if you
Right.
got different degrees that require like more complex than just going to a trade school, and then it's like, well, I can just do this on my own. It's very difficult, and you end up at home, and the parents don't want to throw their kids out on the street, so it's kind of like it's forced to have to work and forced to balance out your life. It's way easy to just escape reality whenever you're at home, whenever you're on your phone, or whenever you're on your Switch, wherever. I mean, so I would just say that, like the fact that people that know that their needs will still be met whether they lift a finger or not, that's a really dangerous place to be. Just in general, it feels comfortable, but you want to be not comfortable. You want to have some discomfort, because that's how you grow in life. Anything in nature gets stronger by some discomfort. The wind blows a plant, the roots grow deeper, and it ends up stronger. But if that never happens, then the first big wind that comes just knocks it over, and that plant's dead. You want some resistance. You want some difficulty, challenge in life, not just a video game.
No, that's really well said. I was actually listening to a podcast in the afternoon yesterday, and the speaker was saying how there's this tendency right now in our culture where we have so celebrated and almost worshiped comfort above everything else. You know what I mean? And it's almost like we are so afraid of any problem or difficulty or something that does make us, like you're saying, uncomfortable, that requires us to kind of lean in and grow, or, okay, this is going to suck for a little while, but it's going to get better if I work at this or whatever. And that's dangerous. And I think some of these things, and I think that's true of anything that we are doing too much of, which, an addiction, or like if we're just doing like even technology, social media, it can become one of those things that's almost like a self-soothe thing that kind of keeps us from dealing with stuff that maybe we really need to look at and deal with so that we can move forward, and that's,
So what I see a lot of times is this works especially better with kids that are still, in high school or college, because they have an actual deadline and work and grades that you can actually assess how they're doing with that. Right. But it's very often I see so many the kids get behind in their work, and it just keeps piling up, and that creates anxiety, and oftentimes they just don't quite know what to do to organize it, to start slowly whittling away, breaking it down into easy chunks. And, a lot of, kids that aren't good with the executive functioning stuff, which is a lot of kids. I mean, I'd say, about half. I think it's
Right.
you can split up a lot of kids between the ones that are good at traditional school and the ones that are, good at, different school, but better school, I like to call it. But what was the question?
No, you're answering it. I think we were talking about, like what type of people you think struggle with this the most, so which you answered. I mean, and that makes sense, people that can, get away with it basically, or don't have maybe those responsibilities yet where they've got the, structure of like, okay, I've got to pay my rent. And some of those life realities, I think, are what kind of keep us, keep us from like overindulging in certain things. Cause we know we have the reality of like, we've got to pay bills. We've got to work and stuff. So no, I think that's all really good advice. And I love everything that you shared today. I think you had some really good tips on how to, kind of watch ourselves so we're not getting out of balance, paying attention to our relationships, making sure we're staying physically fit and realizing the physical toll that some of this takes, like the anxiety that sometimes it can create. Really great, helpful stuff, Keith. And, if you had a few closing things or advice for our listeners out there, keeping in mind that many people listening to my voice right now and us and this interview are, passionate video game people who love it, and they're maybe amazing. I know a lot of them are amazing at it. So what would you say? Any closing like advice on just how to keep this in a good spot in your life?
Wow, I could keep talking for hours. Let me try. Okay, short and concise. Let's see. I mean, really, just simple. Just get outside once a day, even if it's cold out and you don't want to. Just go for a short walk. Doesn't even have to be a half hour. Go for a walk, and then also, as much as possible, schedule in times during your week when at least once, but more than that is much better. We're in person, face to face, with your friends, with your peers. We're just out with people. You want to make sure that you schedule those in, and you want to get into a routine of walking outside. That way, it's less likely that you could slip into a depression, which when you're isolating all the time is very easy to do before you know it. And then once you're in that depression, you don't want to do anything. So kind of just getting used to walking every day, getting used to talking to somebody every day, and once or more a week, be with somebody. That way, if you are starting to feel bad or emotionally not great, your friends can be like, you seem off, is everything okay? And that way, you can kind of keep yourself in check and keep in a healthier place and grow your relationships in a much healthier way.
Right. That's awesome. I think that's great advice. So awesome. Well, Keith, thank you so much for doing this with us today. You had so much great information and so much great advice. And I wish you all the best luck with your practice. I know you're going to be a huge inspiration to people, and hopefully we'll have you on Scar Stories again. I know you've got a lot of experience to share, and I appreciate you taking this time out of your day to join us. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I mean, I love this. I could do this forever.
Awesome. I know, me too. That's why I started a podcast. So awesome. Well, we'll do it again. And I really appreciate it. You had some really great advice today. So thank you again for that.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem.
Right. Thanks. All right. Bye.
You're my favorite sky.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Scar Stories. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button. Help us spread the love. To make a one-time donation to Scar Stories, click on the donation link in the episode notes below. Or, for just a few dollars a month, you can join the Scar Stories community on Patreon. Your membership includes private Q&As with one of my awesome guests, plus a free digital soul guide inspired by our monthly series. Members also get the chance to share their Scar Stories live, on the air, during the final week of each series. Life can hit you hard, and it's easy to quit. Whatever your Scar Story, it matters. You got this.